Hi, this is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the Mass Tsunami podcast. This week we are offering 4 conversations from episode 16, our episode Remembering Stephen Harrison with Donna Cryer, Jörn Schattenberg, and Dimitar Tonev. Plus, from the vault, the last new drug study Stephen ever shared on the podcast, which was last July. This conversation includes the second half of Jörn Schattenberg and my interview with Donna Cryer. It focuses largely on Stephen Harrison's inclusive approaches towards bringing stakeholders to pivotal discussions. Donna starts this conversation by noting an important thing she learned early in her career. When patients, advocates, and physicians work together, their collective power is far more than the sum of their individual impact. She commends Stephen as one KOL who always made certain that patient voices, including hers, and organizations had seats and voices at the table. I quote Donna when she says, "I will be forever grateful for the times he held space so that Donna and other patient advocates could be involved in major discussions." Jörn concurs and notes that this podcast was a key element in sharing different stakeholders' perspectives throughout the entire MASLD community, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic when meetings were held virtually. Finally, I comment that Stephen sought to include allied health providers in discussions the same way Donna describes him as including patients and advocates, and use his work with Louise on the podcast as an example of that. When I asked this group for Harrisonisms, Donna doesn't offer anyone. She says she doesn't tell jokes. She hears other people's jokes and tells them better. I recall Stephen surprised that I knew the meaning of the phrase hotty toddy, which is in fact a special phrase for graduates of the University of Mississippi, and how quickly Stephen was able to integrate phrases of others into his own conversations and presentation. And with that, we end our interview. I'm simply going to repeat what I said at the end of episode 14, Conversations. Stephen was one of the most unique individuals I've ever had the pleasure to know and work with. These conversations touch on just a small sampling of what made Stephen Stephen. So just sit back, listen, learn, absorb. When you're done, check out and perhaps contribute to the memorial page on our LinkedIn discussion group. We'd love to hear your recollections as well.
Donna Cryer.
Stephen connecting me to the podcast, which was pitched to a very business audience, industry audience, scientific audience, and making a space for the patient voice and doing things to support community initiatives as International NASH Day and now Global Fatty Liver Day really is for us, by us. It's for the entire community, by the entire community, but patient-led. And sometimes that doesn't hit everyone the right way. And so that was one of the main things I wanted to talk about today. I have so many instances across my career, and at the Association of Black Gastroenterologists and Hepatologists a few days ago, I had a chance to share some, whether from FDA committees or guidelines committees that I've sat on or board meetings in hospitals and other places. But there is such incredible power when patient advocates and physicians work together and support each other. And Stephen was really unique in holding space for me, for my organization, for patient voices and the community with such a sense of mutual respect that we don't often get. And it allows us to then create new spaces together. And so I will be forever grateful for all the times he held space so that I could come in or bring a patient voice in or a patient perspective. Often then he'd follow up and backing it by data or with something else to further lift the point I was making. But just if part of his legacy is more physicians holding space to allow their patient colleagues to come in and treating us with as much respect as Stephen did and being able to listen to us as much as we listened to and learned from him, I would hope that would be a great way to honor his legacy.
Interesting thought. Jörn?
Jörn Schattenberg.
Obviously, the role Gili and Donna have been playing in the field and advancing some of the successes that have been made, it's great to hear that this mutual support was there and felt on both sides. I know Stephen talked very positively about the patient involvement. It was always somebody who was very convinced that you have to tackle the problems from multiple sides. You guys started the podcast before I joined, so the first momentum or the first speed was into that mutual relationship, as you put it, Donna, from the very beginning. And the podcast, I think, was a small tool in that because it reached a broader audience than you could have through a conference or a hallway. I came to the podcast and it might have been, that's how I got to realize GLI a little bit more intensively when I first actually started listening to the podcast.
Roger Green.
Jörn, it's interesting you should say that, and Donna, because I know Stephen felt that way not only about patients, but also about allied health providers, that when the first time Louise showed up on the podcast, I don't think he was familiar with her background. In fact, when she showed up, I invited her 15 minutes before an episode because somebody had dropped out. But then he went back and he read up on who Louise was and said, this is really good. And allied providers don't get enough voice, and they need to. So again, his vision was just very wide, both wide and deep, but wide in this context, right? Patients, allied health providers, other specialists. I guess I hadn't realized, Don, until you said that at the beginning, he was one of the people who made sure to make space for patients, although frankly, I'm hardly surprised.
Stephen had such an ability to see clearly. So, and by that, I mean, see what needed to be done well ahead of many people and put the things in place to be able to accomplish them and to, stay optimistic, the happy warrior that he was, to stay optimistic and persistent until we got there. But to see long, before, as I think it was Manal's story about, standing in the poster group with no attention, but knowing that like we were in the place that was going to, be the future. But he also was able to see people clearly, I think, in a way that whatever their title or whatever sector assignment or stakeholder group they were, from, he saw me as a fellow entrepreneur. He saw me as somebody like him who liked to build things. Many of our conversations were not about hepatology at all, but we were about being a high performance individual or creating high performance organizations. And how do you create structures that would more efficiently meet a particular need? I think what we really bonded as, people who like to get things done. And he saw that in me. I really am so grateful for that. I will miss one of the few people who really sees me. Well,
I'm not sure where to go from here because I think we've covered most of without asking all the specific questions I had in mind, we've answered most of them. Donna, do you have a Harrisonism?
I don't know. Maybe I laugh so hard or, they just strike me as so profound and perfect. I'm not that person who remembers the way. I am the person who will tell you the joke that you told me and say, well, see, am I right? Like, it's a perfect joke for you. When I hear them, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. That's a Stephenism. Just so no, I'm not the one who, I probably have a list somewhere if I look, but I just appreciated the humor and the crystallization of whatever people were trying to talk around and about. But I am neither that pithy nor sufficiently Southern enough to have them stick with me in that way, but I appreciated them as all get out.
So that's why you keep Jeff around, huh? So you can have someone who's pithy and Southern. And
we added somebody from Mississippi too. It's a double down on that.
So one of the things I appreciated about Stephen was the first time I said hotty toddy to him, he didn't know why I would know what that was. Jörn, if you don't know, hotty toddy is the core phrase of the major cheer at the University of Mississippi.
But wasn't never quite sure.
If you went to the University of Mississippi, saying hotty toddy was like living in Pennsylvania and saying we are. It's major universities tend to have one thing associated with their cheer. At any rate,
sounds like a drink, to tell you the truth.
Hotty toddy does sound like a drink. And in Mississippi, they probably drink it any time it got below 60 degrees because it's pretty warm there. The one I was thinking of today is this is how Stephen picks stuff up. He used to talk about one of the reasons it was such a troubling idea to base everything on biopsy was that a biopsy was only 1/5,000th of the liver. And how could you possibly get samples out of that? Now, statistically, that's an interesting question. But I said to him one day after having 4 months into this podcast, I finally went to school on what a biopsy was entirely. And next time I heard him say that, I said to him afterwards, Stephen, it's not 1/5,000th. You're only taking 1/14th of what you're pulling out of the liver to be the slide. So slide is actually 1/700,000th. And sure enough, 3 weeks later, someone said to me at a meeting, I never realized this until I heard this from Stephen last week, but biopsy slide is only 1/700,000th of the liver. And his ability to pick up and integrate things that quickly was, I think, pretty compelling and cool. I probably have other Harrisonisms also, but I'm still compiling my final list of them. We've gotten into several of them so far.
We should all be so voracious in listening and learning from each other and taking the best things and moving them forward. I smile whenever I see anybody using we should get beyond the biopsy from a stage. My team is, really invested in trademarks and patents and stuff like that. I'm just like, I'm important that the idea is so infused that people have made it their own. I too really appreciate that.
And now back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingmash.com. Next week, we will preview the EASL Congress 2024 with President Alexander Krag, Jörn Schattenberg, and perhaps some of the other key European KOLs. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.